People often have mixed feelings about sequels. On one hand, a sequel can correct the mistakes made in the original and improve on things that were already good. On the other hand, a sequel can disappoint the fans of the original and in some cases even cause the end of a franchise. Well, in this top 10 I list the video games that in many cases didn't even get that one sequel, even if making one would have seemed like the smart thing to do. These are the top 10 video games that deserve a sequel. Number 10. Strider. Strider is one of the many video game series that Capcom has seemingly forgotten it owns. Series like Breath of Fire and Onimusha, both of which I considered putting on this list, but in the end I decided to include Strider instead. Partly because of the tree, it has gone the longest without a new game, and because Strider has only 2 official games under its name. The original, released in arcades in 1989, was one of Capcom's earlier hits, and it was ported to just about every home console around back then, including the NES and Sega Mega Drive. The sequel was released over 10 years later in 2000 for the PlayStation. After that, the series has all but died off. This is one of the series I believe could do very well today if done correctly. I even see a few different directions Capcom could take with the series. They could either keep it as a 2D action platformer similar to the previous games in the series, and release it as a downloadable title, or they could use their own Devil May Cry games as a template to turn Strider into a 3D action hack-and-slash game. All they would need to really do is change the setting from gothic horror into a dystopian future with robots and ninjas. Or better yet, they could do both. Number 9. Killer Instinct. Back in the 90s, Rare was one of the best video game developers in the world. In the span of a single decade, the company created an unbelievable string of classic video games for the Nintendo consoles. Games like Battletoads, Donkey Kong Country, Blast Corps, GoldenEye 007, and of course, Killer Instinct. Easily one of the most over-the-top fighting game series ever created. It's strange that there hasn't been a new Killer Instinct since 1996, especially considering the recent revival of interest in fighting games that has brought us Street Fighter IV, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, the Mortal Kombat reboot, not to mention upcoming games like Street Fighter X Tekken and Tekken Tag Tournament 2. Rare has from time to time teased fans about a third installment, and expressed interest in making a new game in the series. Well, now may be a better time than ever. Number 8. Star Fox. In recent years, Nintendo has had a bad habit of neglecting many of its core franchises. Sure, they've kept churning out more Mario and Zelda titles, but other series like Star Fox and F-Zero have been constantly overlooked. Things are, however, looking a little better for Star Fox at least, as there's a Star Fox game being made for Nintendo's new handheld, the 3DS. The only problem is, it's a remake of Star Fox 64, so there still isn't a new Star Fox game in sight. But if the remake sells well, it could very well lead to a proper Star Fox sequel, perhaps on the Wii U. I would even go as far as to say that Nintendo is testing people's interest in the series with the remake, so it's possible that the series' future depends on the success of the 3DS remake. Hopefully, it's a bright future. Number 7. Panzer Dragoon Saga. Panzer Dragoon Saga is the third game in the Panzer Dragoon series, and the only one in it that's not a rail shooter. Instead, it's an RPG. It was released on the practically dead-on-arrival Sega Saturn late in its life, which resulted in a very limited number of copies being available in the West. Sega has since released one more Panzer Dragoon game, but it has never returned to the RPG format with the series, which is a shame as the game is truly excellent and more than deserves a sequel. The concept has so much potential that it's actually strange that Sega hasn't used it more. An RPG in the Panzer Dragoon universe in the same style as Panzer Dragoon Saga just with current generation graphics, would be amazing. Unfortunately, it doesn't look very likely that such a game will be released, at least in the foreseeable future, but one can always hope. Number 6. Conker's Bad Fur Day. The second game developed by Rare to make it into this list, Conker's Bad Fur Day had the misfortune of being one of the last games released on the N64. It was severely overshadowed by the then newly released PS2, and as such didn't receive the kind of sales it would have deserved. In 2005, a butchered remake was released on the Xbox, which heavily censored the game, but there hasn't been a proper sequel yet. One of the best things in the original game was its humor, which somehow managed to be both smart and stupid at the same time. It was excellently written, well delivered, and most important of all, genuinely funny, a trait that's not exactly common in video games. Many games try to be funny, and most of them fail miserably. Rare has a lot of potential IPs they could be making sequels to, and Conker is probably the one most often requested by fans. Let's just hope that someday Rare will listen to us. Number 5. Shenmue II. The two Shenmue games tell a story of a man seeking revenge for his father's death. The story was interesting and very well told. There was just one small problem. It was never finished. The second game ends on a cliffhanger that was supposed to be the starting point for the third game in the series, but as you most likely have already realized, that game was never made. Yu Suzuki, the creator of the Shenmue series, has expressed interest in completing the story, and in interviews several other people from Sega have said that they would love to make a third Shenmue game. Suzuki has even said that he thinks Sega will let him make Shenmue 3, and that it all comes down to budget. So there is definitely hope that the third game will eventually be made. Number 4. Mother. Mother is a fairly obscure series, at least in the West, but it does have a very dedicated fan base. Most people probably know it better as Earthbound, thanks to the SNES game, which was actually the second game in the series and the only game in it that has been officially released outside Japan. Overall, there are 3 games in the series, the last of which is Mother 3, which was released on the Game Boy Advance in 2006. Disappointingly, the game was never officially released in the West, but the fan translation was made available and it became very popular soon after its release. Since then, a large number of fans have been asking for a fourth game to be made. However, Shigesato Itoi, the series creator, has said that at the moment there are no plans to make a new Mother game, but that he hasn't completely dismissed the idea. The Mother games have always had a very different style compared to other Japanese role-playing games. Instead of a fantasy or sci-fi setting, the Mother games take place in a distinctly American setting, at least as seen from a Japanese perspective. The video game industry needs unique games like Earthbound, so please don't let the series die out, it deserves more. Number 3. Free Space 2. This is probably the most personal pick on this list. For me, this game still stands as one of the best I've ever played, and definitely the best within its genre. Free Space 2 is a space combat sim released in 1999. It received very positive reviews and several Best of the Year awards. Unfortunately, the sales were very disappointing, especially for such a well-received game. This, coupled with the eventual closing of Interplay, who still owned the rights to Free Space, the possibility of a sequel is quite slim. This is unfortunate because Free Space 2, much like Shenmue 2, ended on a cliffhanger, so a lot of plot threads went completely unresolved, leaving fans like myself disappointed. Quite honestly, it would be amazing to play a game like this with state-of-the-art graphics, watching as spaceships several miles long tear each other apart. Yet, of all the games I've put into this list, this is probably the least likely to happen, but one can always hope. Maybe some developer will eventually pick up the Free Space license, but I'm not holding my breath for this one anymore. Number 2. the Chrono series. Here we have two games that are both often considered to be among the best ever made, Chrono Trigger and Chrono Cross. I find it strange that for a very long time now Square Enix has done very little to capitalize on the popularity of this series. The sales of both games were very good and the reviews were excellent, and fans have been asking for a sequel for over a decade now. So why hasn't there been one? Shinji Hashimoto, the senior vice president of Square Enix, actually said that if people want a sequel, they should buy more. I find this quite interesting considering that the last release in the series, the DS remake of Chrono Trigger, sold over 1 million copies, which is more than can be said about any of their other RPG games this console generation that isn't named Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest or Kingdom Hearts. The concept of time travel in an RPG has amazing potential, and there are so many different ways to make it work for the game's advantage, and yet all the potential this series has is being wasted. There are clearly a lot of people interested in this series, and with some effort that number could grow by quite a lot. I mean, there hasn't exactly been too many JRPGs released in the West in recent years. There's definitely demand for these games, and quite frankly, there's no other developer with as much potential to meet that demand than Square Enix. Number 1. The Legend of Dragoon. Another Japanese game on the list, and another RPG. This isn't because I don't like games made in the West or anything. In fact, most of my favorite games this generation are from Western developers. It just seems that Western developers don't neglect their game series quite as badly as the Japanese seem to do, but I digress. The Legend of Dragoon was released on the original PlayStation in different regions between the December of 1999 and January of 2001. It is one of the few RPGs developed internally by Sony. While the game got a somewhat mixed critical reception, the fan reaction was exceedingly positive. The sales were also very good for a new IP in a genre that at the time was very crowded due to the popularity of Final Fantasy. I'm not sure why Sony has never followed up this game with a sequel, as I think it had and still has the potential to become one of Sony's flagship game series. Sony has created a very strong first-party lineup in the past 15 years, consisting of games from just about every possible genre, except for RPGs. And those were my top 10 video games that deserve a sequel. If you disagree with my choices, then tell me in the comments what you think should be on the list, and hopefully, I'll see you again soon.